Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Disavowed by T. O'Fallon. Narrated by Samantha Prescott. Prologue. Dom glanced at his watch, shaking his head as he uttered a low laugh. "It's 3 a.m. Can you believe it? We've been talking for 5 hours. Amazing. Daisy nodded. It had been amazing. They'd talked about everything. Their jobs, friends, their favorite food, including their shared passion for all things chocolate. It was the easiest, most naturally flowing conversation she'd ever had with another human being. It was like kismet or fate. Whatever label she concocted for what was going on between them, it was tangible and soul-deep. She knew that with every fiber of her being. For a long moment, Dom didn't say anything. Neither did she. There was no need. The invisible rope that had drawn them together had been shortening with every passing minute, tugging them toward something she sensed they both knew was inevitable. She could see it in the depths of his clear blue eyes. Raw desire matching her own. "I should go." His gaze dipped to her mouth. "Don't," she wanted to say, but didn't. Couldn't, even though he was quite possibly the one. With that realization came gut-wrenching fear. Fear of reaching out and grabbing hold of something she'd never wanted more in her life. Fear of what would happen if she was wrong. He cupped her face, slowly and seductively skimming his thumb up and down her cheek before rubbing it gently across her lips. Daisy's heart skipped a beat, then another. Partly from panic and partly from pure, unadulterated need. "Your skin is so soft," he said, slipping his hand to her nape, his fingers moving in a rhythmic motion. "Like silk and velvet." At his words, his touch, hot flames licked across her skin until every cell in her body began to burn, for him. When he kissed her, a fiery, barely contained need exploded inside her, screaming for more, so much more. The contact was light at first, and when she kissed him back, he applied more pressure, urging her lips apart, slipping his tongue inside. He groaned, a deep, throaty rumble that sent tingles up her spine. This feels so right. He feels so right. Careful. Too much heat and she could wind up burned beyond recognition. Sliding his hand to her waist, he tugged her closer on the sofa, slanting his mouth across hers. God, but the man could kiss, and it was everything she knew it would be. Hot, wet, insistent. "Jesus, you taste sweet." As if to prove his point, he licked a spot just below her ear that was so sensitive she gasped. "Sweeter than I could ever imagine." "What exactly did you imagine?" she whispered on a throaty sigh, struggling to keep her eyes from rolling to the back of her head at the incredible sensations his mouth was inflicting on the curve of her neck. "From the moment you walked into Alex's apartment and tried to pepper spray me, I wanted you. I wondered what it would be like to touch you, kiss you, and watch you lose control." He trailed off, sucking on her earlobe. Was as close to coherent speech as she could manage. "I could totally get used to this." "Don't. Not yet," the cautious, sensible side of her brain warned. "Too late," the other side countered. "Sooner or later, you have to let loose and go for it. Or risk being alone forever." Her searching hands contacted something hard, his gun, then his badge, clipped next to the holster on his belt. She moved to his back and dug her fingers into his thick muscles. He groaned, pressing himself against her even more as he plunged his tongue deeper. Damn, but she wanted him. As it was, she could barely keep her hands from tearing off his clothes. He pulled her onto his lap, then cradled her head in his big hands. "Daisy," His voice was rough. His Adam's apple rose and fell when he swallowed. He stared at her intently, watching, waiting, nostrils flaring. Her heart hammered in her chest. She knew what he wanted, and she wanted it too. He made her feel alive as never before. But giving herself to a man after knowing him for only a few hours was beyond insane. It had disaster written all over it. Yet everything in her feminine intuition told her if ever there was a man to hurl caution to the wind for, it was Dom. Yes, that one word came easily to her lips. Yes, she repeated, more to herself than to him. Strong arms picked her up and carried her down the hallway to her bedroom. He laid her on the bed, but when she would have reached for him, he began undressing her. Slowly, taking his sweet time. With infinite care, he stroked every inch of skin he bared. When she was completely naked, he stood back, and his darkened, hungry gaze traveled the length of her body. His jaw tightened. Even the day-old growth of beard couldn't conceal the masculine angles and planes of his handsome face. "You really are the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." The heat in his eyes was unmistakable. Daisy licked her lips and swallowed, the breath she'd been holding leaving in a rush. He kicked off his boots and knelt on either side of her outstretched legs. Leaning over, he kissed her deeply once again. The barest hint of spicy, musky cologne invaded her senses, and with every breath she drew, she wanted him more. Needing to touch him again, she tugged his shirt up to get to his bare skin. Corded muscles rippled beneath her fingers, and she dug her nails deeper into his flesh. Dom rose to his knees and splayed his hands on her breasts, massaging them, kneading her nipples to such tight little buds she wanted to scream from the mounting pleasure. His hands continued a sensual path down her rib cage to her belly. Spreading her thighs, he used his thumbs to part her slick folds. A strangled, whimpering sound escaped from her throat. Tugging her to the edge of the bed, he kneeled on the floor and draped her legs over his shoulders. When he lowered his head to her, she trembled with anticipation. His mouth was hot and greedy, his tongue pushing inside her, lapping and licking with feral urgency. She groaned and sifted her fingers through his hair. He seemed to know exactly where to touch her, how to heighten every one of her body's responses. He curled his hands over the tops of her thighs, pulling her tighter against his mouth. Incredible sensations washed over her, almost to the point of torture. She grabbed the bed covers, fisting them in her hands, thrashing her head from side to side. The orgasm overtook her, and she arched off the bed, uttering a hoarse scream. Her breath came in gasps, her breasts heaving. Through half-closed lids, she watched him rise and begin stripping off his clothes. She couldn't tear her eyes away as the most perfectly formed male body she'd ever seen was revealed. His chest was broad and powerful, magnificent and bronzed, covered by a thin smattering of hair. Thick biceps and pectorals flexed as he stepped out of his pants, revealing long, heavily muscled legs. When he stood, her gaze took in his perfectly toned abs, his taut, tapered waist, and his very long, very thick, and fully erect penis. He grabbed a condom from the wallet in his pants pocket and made quick work of sheathing himself. Then he was leaning over her, sucking one of her nipples deep into his mouth. She moaned and clasped the back of his head. His hips settled between her thighs, his erection nudging firmly against her wetness. He shifted, taking her other nipple into his mouth, and she grabbed his ass, bending her legs and dragging her heels along the backs of his thighs. If he doesn't get inside me now, I'll die. Levering onto his elbows, he touched his hands to her cheek in a gesture so tender her insides melted. "Daisy," he whispered. "I want to make this good for you. Look at me." When she did, he raised his hips and guided his erection to her core, pushing inside. She gasped, momentarily shocked by his size. He paused, his brows drawing together in obvious concern. "More," she breathed. "Now, don't stop." The tension in his face eased, and he began a gentle rocking rhythm, pulling out, then pushing in further each time until her tight, wet walls stretched and she gave in to the escalating pleasure. The weight of his large body on top of her should have been overwhelming, but it wasn't. It was wonderful. Perfect. Worth the risk. He was thick and hard, thrusting with powerful strokes as their hips came together again and again, pushing her to the brink of another mind-blowing orgasm. "God, you're sexy," he breathed into her mouth, then thrust his tongue inside in a kiss so forceful and consuming she could barely breathe. "Tell me you want me," he said urgently. I do want you." Clawing into his back with her nails, she pressed her chest tighter to his, still unable to get close enough. Wanting him deeper inside her, she locked her legs around his ass and met his quickening thrusts. His breath was hot against her neck and face, his body trembling. He was holding back, waiting for her to come, she realized, and she did. White flashes exploded behind her lids as the orgasm rolled through her. She bit down on his thick shoulder to quiet the scream rising in the back of her throat. At the same time, he thrust once more and stilled. His cock throbbed and pulsed inside her as he groaned loudly against her neck. They lay there for several moments, hearts pounding, chests heaving until he rolled onto his back and rested his hand on her thigh. "That was incredible." He turned onto his side to face her. "No, it was more than incredible. It was... shit. I honestly don't know what that was." Daisy could only smile as he stared down at her. Like him, she had no words for what had just passed between them, except life-altering. A lock of sandy blonde hair fell across his forehead, and she reached up to comb it from his face. He clasped her hand, holding it to his lips just before shutting his eyes. Daisy lost count of how many more times they made love that night. The last things she remembered before falling asleep were the warmth of Dom's skin beneath her cheek and the wondrous, fervent belief that nothing in her life would ever be the same again. When the alarm clock blared, Daisy flung out her hand, slapping it into silence. Bright light filtered through the bedroom blinds. She stretched, feeling both sated and wanton, and couldn't hold back the shit-eating grin forming on her mouth. Reaching out with her other arm, she felt nothing but cold sheets and froze. She snapped open her eyes and pushed to her elbows. She was alone in her bedroom. The floor where Dom had dropped his clothes was empty, as was the bedside table. No note, no nothing. Holding her breath, she listened for sounds in the bathroom, but there were none. Exhaling, she took another breath and held it, listening, but no other sounds came to her ears. No, no, no. The fear she'd tamped down only hours ago, the same fear she'd consciously thrown to the wind for the sake of what she really and truly believed was meant to be, returned. Whipping back the covers, she leaped from the bed and strode naked, room to room through her entire apartment, her entirely empty apartment. Standing in the middle of her living room, she covered her mouth with her hand and choked down a sob. She hadn't been wrong about him. It wasn't possible. There had been a connection, something real. Hours ago, she would have bet her life on it. But now? Dom was gone. After everything that had passed between them, he'd left in the middle of the night without a word. Daisy squeezed her eyes shut, wrapping her arms around herself. God, but she'd taken a chance, done something wild, and it had felt right at the time. Perfect, actually. And while she hadn't voiced it, she'd given more than just her body to him. She'd given away a piece of her heart. This can't be happening. Please, no. But it was happening. And as the first tear rolled down her cheek, she made a promise to herself then and there. Never again. Chapter 1. 1 year later. Police! Search warrant! Dom kicked at the rusty warehouse door. The door flew open with an ear-splitting squeal, then slammed backward against the wall. Gripping his Glock in both hands, he swept the dimly lit interior. Without looking, he knew his partner, Detective Gray Yates, was doing the same on the other side of the building. With his gun extended, he moved quickly, deeper inside the old Brooklyn warehouse, constantly glancing up and to the sides. The other detective partnered up with him, Teddy Pulaski, followed a few steps behind. The tactical gun-mounted flashlight on his Smith & Wesson lit up the corridor before him in an eerie glow, but it also screamed out his position to anyone hiding between the crates. He pushed onward, nearly to the end of the warehouse, when he caught the telltale signs. Where there should have been dust, there wasn't. Where there shouldn't have been dust, there was. On the floor, on the shelving. Someone had moved things around. He stopped and held up a closed fist. Behind him, Pulaski breathed heavily. The only other sound came from the other search teams scouring the warehouse, clearing sections as they went. "Come on, Carew," Pulaski whispered. "Let's get on with this, for Christ's sake." Ignoring the other detective, Dom shut his eyes and took shallow breaths, slowing his heartbeat, tuning into his surroundings as any seasoned soldier would. A subtle shift in the air current flowed past his left cheek, bringing with it the odor of soap and sweat. Then a light scraping sound that seemed to stop before it had even started, but it had been there. He was sure of it. He slowed his pace. The last thing he wanted was to miss what he'd come there for in the first place. Jack Schneider. The bastard was here. Even without seeing him, he could feel the other man's presence. Like him, Schneider would know all the Delta Force tricks, including hiding in plain sight and other tactics drilled into them during situational awareness training. Counting on Schneider not shooting him in the back was a risk, but his gut told him he'd pegged the guy correctly. There were so many cops in the building, there was no way Schneider could take a shot and not get drilled. Schneider's only chance to beat a major felony weapons rap was to keep his ass low and stay hidden. Dom opened his eyes and lowered his fist. He and Pulaski pressed onward. The warehouse seemed to go on forever, taking up an entire city block. The concrete floor was lined with row after row of metal shelving stacked to the ceiling with wooden crates and cardboard boxes. Easy for anyone to hide and take him out before he ever saw it coming. The air was icy cold, but sweat trickled down his back just the same. Taking more shallow breaths, he listened with every step. Soon all he heard was the beating of his heart and his own slow, steady intake of air. According to their informant, his quarry was somewhere on this side of the building. He needed to confront the man. Alone. He'd have to concoct a way to get Pulaski out of there. It would leave him without backup, but it was all part of the plan. One he'd been crafting meticulously for over a year. "I'll find you, you son of a bitch." He clenched his jaw to keep from swearing out loud. Any cop or military personnel who turned to the dark side to make a buck was lower than slug shit as far as he was concerned. The guy he was after was a card-carrying member of Slug Shit Incorporated, a.k.a. the Pyramid, the most notorious group of assassins to walk the earth. The pyramid had tried to kill his former partner, Cassie Flannery, then kidnapped his current partner's fiancé, Alex Romano, a police administrative aide, to squeeze information out of her about the security setup at police headquarters. Luckily, both Cassie and Alex had survived. Another barely audible sound came to his ears, but he kept walking. 2 more steps and he saw it. Darkness, 5 feet above him, in between 2 crates on the second tier of metal shelving. All the other crates on that row had dim, filtered light shining through. Not so for the 2 crates he'd just passed. Something that shouldn't have been there was blocking the light. Across the aisle, another crate rested on the bottom shelf with its lid slightly askew. A distraction. Schneider, you just gave yourself away. The hackles on Dom's neck prickled, and it took every ounce of restraint not to glance to his left and plug the man straight through the heart. His pulse raced, and he let out a slow, controlled breath through his nose. Keep your cool. He looked over his shoulder to see Pulaski searching left and right along the corridor of crates. As expected, Pulaski's untrained senses didn't detect a thing out of place, even though he'd just passed within 3 feet of a trained killer. Up ahead at the end of the warehouse, a buzzing fluorescent light bulb flickered overhead, illuminating a 6-foot-long metal table tucked against the wall. Exactly what Dom had expected. Weapons. He took quick inventory. Hand grenades, semi-automatic pistols, Kalashnikov AK-47s, and RPG-7 rocket launcher. Before him was a deadly stockpile of mostly Soviet-made weaponry, all favorites of pyramid assassins. "Holy fuck!" Pulaski exclaimed loudly, not bothering to whisper anymore. "Man, we hit the jackpot. Look at all this shit." "Yeah, how about that?" Dom affected an air of surprise in his voice. Muted voices floated to him from the far side of the warehouse, but he had every confidence Gray would keep the rest of the entry team away. Now to get rid of Pulaski. After holstering his gun, he tipped his head in the direction of the other side of the warehouse. "Head back and give Gray the happy news, would you?" He pulled a small spiral pad and pen from his jacket pocket. "I'll start a preliminary inventory and call it in to the lieutenant." Pulaski holstered his weapon, then leveled Dom with a suspicious look. "Maybe I'd better stay here and help. I wouldn't want you to lose any evidence again, Carew." "I got this," he said through gritted teeth, and since he outranked the other detective by several years, Pulaski dutifully about-faced and headed back in the direction from which they'd come, but not before making a disgusted sound in the back of his throat. As the other man's footsteps receded, Dom took an intentionally loud breath and tossed the pad and pen onto the table. He slipped one hand into his jacket pocket and pulled out the small flask. "Gotta make this look good." After unscrewing the top, he took a swig and headed back down the aisle. He stopped at the open crate, the flask intentionally visible in his hand. He turned, leaning forward, pretending to inspect the lid. Come on. Every muscle in his body tensed, coiling tight, steeling himself for the blow. If he didn't make this look good, the ruse wouldn't work. The air shifted again, shelving creaked, then a whooshing sound. The force flung him forward, knocking him from his feet. He doubled over the top of the crate and grunted as the wind escaped his lungs. Pain lanced through his ribs as he tried to suck in a breath. A hand gripped his arm and yanked him off the crate. He ducked an instant before a fist connected with his jaw. He jabbed Schneider in the gut and was rewarded with a loud oof. He lunged at the other man, tackling him to the ground. They rolled across the aisle until his head whacked into the metal shelving. Fuck. He groaned as pain splintered his skull. He shook his head and kicked with both feet, hurling Schneider off him. Rewarded by the sound of the other man's skull whacking into a crate. "Motherfucker," Schneider growled. Dom staggered to his feet and for a few seconds saw stars. He yanked out his Glock and pointed it dead center on Schneider's chest. The other man breathed heavily, and there was just enough light coming from the flickering fluorescent bulb not 6 feet away for him to see Schneider had hit his head pretty damn hard. The guy's hand came away with blood when he tried to rise off the floor. "Police, stay down," he said in a firm yet subdued tone. The last thing he wanted was for the other team still searching the warehouse to come running. He inched into the light so that his face would be visible. Then he glanced in all directions. His informant said the quarry would be alone, but he wasn't taking any chances. Ignoring the warning, Schneider planted his fists on the floor and tried to get to his feet. Dom parked his boot on Schneider's chest and shoved him back onto the floor. "Buddy," he said, unable to keep the impatience from his tone. "I'm only going to say this one more time. If you don't keep your ass glued to the floor, I'll blast your chest full of holes." He knew firsthand the guy was an expert marksman with multiple wartime kills. Giving him the opportunity to reach for another hidden weapon? Not gonna happen. He gripped his gun tighter. He was fully prepared to make good on his warning to shoot the other man, but he hoped to hell he didn't have to. It would set his plan back at least another 6 months. Unacceptable. Speaking of unacceptable, he likewise hoped their little wrestling match hadn't attracted the other team sweeping the warehouse. He was counting on Gray to keep them all busy until he gave the signal. Now they were both illuminated by sufficient light that each could see the other man's face. It had been nearly 15 years, but he still recognized him. Jack Schneider, traitor to the Army uniform and to every man and woman who died protecting the American way of life. "Get up," he ordered, then watched as Schneider stood slowly to his full height. Dom had forgotten how big the bastard was. At about 6'2" and nearly 200 pounds, they were nearly the same size. "Put your hands on top of your head and interlace your fingers." Schneider's face was now hidden partially by shadow, but Dom intentionally remained in the light, waiting for the moment of recognition. "Son of a bitch." Schneider's face twisted into a hesitant grin. "That you, Carew?" He pretended to search Schneider's face as if he were struggling to recall the man's identity. This had to look like a purely coincidental encounter, when in reality it was a well-planned and carefully executed meeting. "Schneider." He feigned surprise, cracking a smile that he didn't feel in the slightest. "Son of a bitch is right." He lowered his gun, keeping his finger on the trigger. Like him, Schneider had been Delta and was fully capable of killing a man silently and efficiently with his bare hands, courtesy of the taxpayers. "You aren't really gonna shoot me, are you, buddy?" Schneider lowered his hands from his head, outstretching his arms in question. "That depends." He eyed Schneider with suspicion. "You gonna run on me?" "Truce," Schneider said. "For old time's sake." "Attaboy, asshole. Play right into my trap like a puppet on a string." Hesitantly, he lowered his weapon, then shoved it into his holster. "What the hell are you doing here?" He dipped his head to the table covered with weapons. Schneider snorted. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you." A shout of "all clear" at the far end of the warehouse had him whipping his gaze down the aisle. His partner could hold the troops off for only so long before they'd come to check on him. Every second was crucial. "Try me." He stepped to within a couple feet of Schneider. Schneider indicated the flask that had fallen from Dom's hand during a scuffle. "A little early to be hitting the bottle, isn't it, Officer Carew?" "Not your business. Just part of the plan. And that's Detective Carew to you." "My apologies, Detective." Schneider's tone was laced with sarcasm. "Apology accepted. Time to dangle the carrot. Now, start talking and make it fast. I've got a meeting with IA in an hour. Bastards are on my ass enough as it is." He paused to let that information sink in. "What's with the small arsenal?" Schneider took a deep breath, and he knew precisely what the guy was thinking.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?